Hi, this is Dr. Quadri, your partner in emotional health. Uh, Today I'm going to be talking about personality disorders. And so three things we'll be talking about, anxiety, impulsivity, and flexible thought. So let's start. So I want to kind of give you a little background and talk and what causes personality disorders to occur. So here are the few things I want to talk about. So we are genetically born with certain personality traits, and in three things we're divided into. We have to look at anxiety, impulsivity, and our thoughts, how they are organized. And then we are predisposed to these three things, then what also helps is environment. So what environment does, we're influenced from birth by our caretakers and environment we live in. So think about it like this. Genetically, you're predisposed or you have limitations because of genetically you're born a certain way. Then the environment will comes in and shapes and influences those limitations. So before we dive in talking about personality disorders, I want to talk about DSM-5 personality. According to DSM-5, how personality disorders are divided. So the DSM-5 is a diagnostic statistic manual. So it's divided into three clusters: cluster A, cluster B, cluster C. So under cluster A, you can think of these cluster of personality disorders. They usually are unique to where their thoughts are inflexible or restricted thoughts. In that, we have paranoid personality disorder, it's schizoid personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder. Then you have the cluster B traits, which are kind of clumped in. They all have a common theme of impulsivity. In there, we have the antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. And the next category is cluster C. They are more clumped in. The more common theme with them is the anxiety. In them, the three personality disorders are avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So I want to dive in and talk about these three traits I said earlier: anxiety, impulsivity, and thoughts. Okay. So when I said they're genetically predisposed to anxiety, that means you see some people in general in life. You see some people are very much anxious. So you can put these traits in spectrum, right? And you have somebody who's severely anxious to somebody who's not anxious at all. They're just completely calm. The anxious people will be more the restlessness and the calm. They're just calm, and you can tell their whole presence. They are calm and they make you feel calm. And then the impulsivity, and the second part of that is the impulsivity is that you see the impulsive people being very impulsive, reactive, doing things without thinking. Then you have the other extreme end where they're very thoughtful, methodical. Sometimes it's very hard for them to give an answer, and you have to like shake them to give you the answer. They're thinking too much. And then you have people who have thoughts. And then what I mean by thoughts is that there are people who have that flexible thinking to very much rigid thinking. Rigid thinkers are usually, no matter what you say to them, it's very hard to convince them. And then the flexible people they're easily malleable. They're too flexible. Sometimes they don't have their own opinion. Their thoughts are just all over, and their thought. So these are the three traits we're kind of born with in terms of, in that spectrum we're born with, sort of. So you could have somebody who has severe anxiety to no impulsivity and flexible thinking, or they could have somebody with no anxiety, high impulsivity, or rigid thinking. Or any of these three can be in any different phase, shape, or form, and they can come in. These things can come in different extreme end to somewhere in the middle, or somewhere in the closer to the one end or the other end. So that's what makes us different as human beings, right? We have different shades of these three things, and that's what gives us personality. That's what makes us different. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what somebody who's extreme anxious person looks like, and somebody who's an extreme calm. So extreme anxious person would be somebody like I said, they have excessive worry. These are the people who are very severely guilty conscious. They need that constant reassurance, and they're dependent to make decisions. It's hard for them to make decisions on their own. They're constantly needing that reassurance. They're anxious. They're worried about disappointing people. Then you have somebody who's extreme calm. They're just not at all anxious. These are people, yeah, they're kind of careless. They not so much they're not running by guilty conscious. They appear to be overly confident or independent. And they could be making those careless mistakes and not worrying, and sometimes they just come across like too, it's a slang word, you can say they're too chill. And that can be very troublesome too, because you have to have that balance of anxiety. You can't be too chill and you can't be too anxious. So then you have people in that spectrum. So you have to look at, some people are in the middle, some people are on this calm side, or they're on the anxious side. That's why I said it's a spectrum of that we are kind of genetically predisposed to. Then the next trait I said that we're genetically predisposed to is the impulsivity. So next thing I look at somebody says that how are they in terms of impulsivity? So we look at, when I'm assessing somebody, I'm looking at their anxiety level. Now I'm looking at impulsivity level. So in impulsivity, again, looking at the two extreme end, the severe end, and then the other extreme severe end. So when somebody's impulsive, obviously they're reckless, overreactive, easily frustrated. They can be forgetful. They come across disorganized. And these are the people who are kind of blunt. They lack that filter, right? These are the people, the ones who get in trouble. If I'll use a student example, these are the ones that just blurt out answers. They don't wait for their turn. It's very hard for them to be patient, right? They're impatient. They constantly need to be doing something. Then you have these people who are not so impulsive at all, right? These are the people, they're very thoughtful, methodical, they're underactive, very slow. They're not reactive. They don't get frustrated. Nothing bothers them, right? They could be, they appear to be more organized, or you can think of them, their thoughts are kind of inhibited. They don't have any, where on the impulsive side, your thoughts are all over the place. They're just impulsive thoughts going. And here you may have no thoughts. It's just like, they look very stoic to you. It's like, okay, it's just that whole dichotomy, like from here to the other end. But again, these are the two extreme end, right? You find people in two extreme end, and you may find them right in the middle, where they're not so impulsive, but then they're not so inhibited either, right? And then they're not so overreactive, or they're not underactive. They're in the middle. So so you find people in this extreme, from either extreme end, in the middle somewhere, or towards the end, towards this end. And so that's where I look at people, so where they are in their impulsivity. So the third part of that personality disorder I also assess is we talked about anxiety, where they are in their anxiety level, where they are in their impulsivity level. This third one is very important too. It's where I'm assessing their thought process, their thoughts. Where are they in their thoughts? So you can tell that when somebody's having a conversation, when you're talking to you. So I'm assessing for, are they they're flexible in their thinking or not, or they're rigid in their thinking. So what does that mean by, again, two extreme ends? Somebody's really flexible and somebody's really rigid. So where are they in that thought process? So somebody who's flexible, when you talk to them, you can see these are the people sometimes they feel like they don't even have an opinion. They're easily convinced. You can tell them, they listen to you. They're just they're too worrying about pleasing people, or they're just kind of, their thoughts are flexible. They can go any direction. You can tell them, you can convince them about anything. When they talk, their thoughts can be talking about different things. Their thoughts can be very loose. And they can be having multiple interests, not one interest. And they appear a little disorganized in their speech. And then also in terms of personality, they seem very vulnerable too. They believe in things, and you can convince them. And then so a lot of times what happens is they're so accommodating, because it's so flexible in their thinking, they overburden themselves. They get overburdened. And then because of that, the boundaries are not so rigid. They're very flexible, and socially flexible too. So when they're socially flexible, their boundaries are flexible, that tends to make them more vulnerable to get either overburdening themselves, right? They can get difficulty with maintaining relationships, or people may take advantage of them, and then on the opposite end, the thoughts where people are very, very rigid, like to a point, it's their my way or the highway, right? They're hard to convince. Their thoughts are rigid, very hard to convince them. Extremely rigid thinking. And also in interest-wise, there could be very restricted in what they like, what they don't like. And when you talk to them, you can tell their topic of interest is one thing. They'll, no matter what topic you try to convince them to bring it to another topic, they get bored with it, they can't deal with it, they'll bring it back to the topic of their interest. So they're constantly coming back to that. So as a person, you get kind of like frustrated. I'm like, why are they just kind of going back to that? And sometimes they come across as poverty of speech. They're not able to talk much. They only have certain things to talk about. And then these are the people that their thoughts are so rigid and limited, it's hard for them to trust people. They can be very suspicious and doubtful because they lack the ability to be flexibility to look things other ways because they only focus on their thoughts, their thinking. They cannot, sometimes they lack empathy, or sometimes they lack empathy. They cannot understand what other people are coming from because they're just so fixated in their own thinking. And then if you talk about something else, they may look suspicious and doubtful, and they have difficulty trusting people. So that what happens is the opposite on the other end, where they can be burdened to other people. So when you are around them, you feel overwhelmed with them because they drain you so much that they're constantly thinking and putting themselves in the front, and they can't talk about any other topic. So you constantly feel like you have to compensate for them. And they'll appear the boundaries to be very rigid because because they are very much into you have to kind of follow they follow the rules pretty good to the T sometimes. And so that's why their boundaries they can be flexible with time, money, or whatever you say, and they can be very concrete. They may take things very literally. So it's very hard for them to be flexible. And then because of that, they come across very socially awkward. Because they cannot be flexible and socially and understand other people where they're coming from, and they lack communication, so they come across very socially awkward. So another question people ask me is, when listening to this, you might say, oh my God, I have all of this. Do I have a personality disorder, right? No, not necessarily. Personality disorder versus personality traits. They're two. So when does it become a disorder? Because the thing is, we're human beings. Like I said earlier, we are born with these certain traits. We all have anxiety to a certain degree. We all are impulsive to a certain degree. We all have these thoughts, certain type of thoughts to a certain degree. Now, when these three things become excessive in one way or the fashion, like 1 degree to the other, not only they are excessive or severe, then the second thing is you have to look at is when these are traits. So when they become a disorder, when these excessive traits, it affects your personal life, your home life, or school life. So let's just say somebody who is excessively impulsive, reactive, and they are anxious at the same time, and their thoughts are superly rigid. Now, when you have a person like that, so then you start noticing they are, and then let's just say on top, remember I said personality also is we are born with these traits, but then our environment shapes us. So let's just say they had all these traits, and then the environment they were raised in was pretty not the best environment. They were not raised appropriately. They were abused, or they were just in a very bad environment they lived in. They didn't have a good home life, things like that. So what happens when that happens? When you put so when you have an environment that is not healthy, then those traits that you're born with are not shaped enough so they could learn to use those traits in a healthy way. So what happens is those traits, instead of using in a healthy way, they start using them in an unhealthy way. So what does that mean by using an unhealthy way? Somebody, let's just say as a kid, they went through a trauma. What happened is then that somebody who's an anxious person, they go through trauma, that anxiety can go even exponentially worse, right? Because trauma causes a lot more stress and anxiety. And then they're constantly now, because of trauma, have difficulty relaxing, and they're reliving their trauma. The anxiety is even more worse. What happened? Let's just say they were born with some impulsivity traits. So that impulsivity, then it becomes even more worse for them, because now they're very much more reactive. Already trauma makes them startle easily. They're on top impulsive in nature. They'll be a lot more impulsive, a lot more reactive. And then let's just say thoughts were rigid too. So now what happens if their thoughts are born with rigid thinking? with that trauma, what it does is now that trauma re-emphasizes what happened to them because their thoughts are so rigid, they're so fixated, it will be very hard for them to remove themselves to what happened. They will relive the trauma even more intensely, more severely, and it just makes them really, really hard. And then now you can come up, then what happened with these traits come in, so then you can develop into a personality disorder at that time, because it's if not treated early on in their life, these traits, and then we not address these issues, then as they get older, then they can, because of the improper upbringing and these traits, they kind of go hand in together, and then lead to a personality disorder. So just because you have trait doesn't mean you have a disorder. What I'm trying to say is, as long as you have these traits and these traits are functional, you're okay. I mean, as long functional meaning you still have a good relationship, you're doing well in relationship wise, your personal life is good. Things at home and at work, you're doing well at work. You're functional. You're attending work. You're doing what you're supposed to work. You're going to school. You're doing things. You're able to live through these personalities and without an issue. So we all have these traits, and we live with them. So we are human beings. We're complex human being. So we'll have multiple symptoms and multiple traits with us. We could be a combination of all these things. So it's sometimes it's very hard to, people kind of go in, oh, I have this personality, I have that personality, I have this personality. I believe it's more of a complex thing. And then the only time you look at, one disorder versus the one traits, when you see one of them is a little bit more excessive than the others, and we say, okay, this is more predominantly this, then we call it that. But as a human beings, we're not rigid, we're not machines, so we are made up of multiple things. So I was kind of talking about it a little bit earlier, gave that example. So again, it comes in spectrum, our personality traits, right? They come in spectrum. So I'm just going to reiterate and talk about that. Multiple examples. You'll probably see people, I just want to reiterate that we are in spectrum. That what makes us unique, what gives us our who we are. It just we complement each other, having these different traits and different upbringing. So it's not it doesn't make us normal or abnormal. It's just who we are. So just understanding ourselves, we are in different spectrum. We have different traits, and builds that self-confidence of ourselves rather than trying to be somebody we're not. Now, we could definitely constantly be being influenced. So our personality can be constantly be changing, because as we're growing older, as we're experiencing life more and more, as I've seen it where in my practice, where being a child psychiatrist, I've seen kids grow in my practice, becoming from children to an adult. Like when they first came in, they were a little bit more anxious, on the impulsive and low confident. As they got older and older, they see life, they matured, and their anxiety got better. They seemed less anxious, less impulsive, because they learned to live with it a lot better. So I wouldn't, so that's why it's very important to have that healthy environment, be around healthy environment, and then build that self-confidence. There's another topic I know, and in terms of how our environment influences, in a different video I'm going to talk about is core beliefs. That's going to be that's kind of targeting more the internal environment, because that plays a big role. Also who we are, what we are. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that we are genetically predisposed to these three things: anxiety, impulsivity, and thoughts. There's something we're just born with. But the good news is we can influence those three things by our environment. Like I said, the external environment and the internal environment will help us influence it, so that we're in a sort of kind of in the middle spectrum of these things. So we're not too severely anxious or not at all anxious. We're too severely impulsive or not at all impulsive, or thoughts are rigid and flexible. So we can shape these three things, kind of bring it right in the middle, where they're more not in the middle, more of like they're functional. These impulsive traits, they can be functional. These anxiety traits, it can be functional. These rigid or inflexible thinking can be more flexible or more functional, right? So if we can use the environment to shape that, like I said, internal environment and the external environment. In the next video, I'll be talking about more the internal environment, how we can shape that, like using core beliefs. Yeah, so those are kind of be my future videos talking about that, how we can shape ourselves. And I want to talk about in the future also how these personality traits affect our psychiatric disorders like depression, severe anxiety disorders, or impulsive disorders, or schizophrenia, and all this stuff, and then how these traits can also affect not only the disorders and its treatment. So that's going to be my next talking about that. Thank you very much. And if you have any comments, anything, you can any questions, you can leave it at the comment below. I really appreciate you listening to my video. Again, I'm Dr. Quadri, your partner in emotional health. Thank you very much.